Do you anticipate that if there is a change in administration, and by change I mean a Republican-controlled White House, that we could actually see a little bit more of an embrace of this idea that Lutnick has put out there to move some of that stuff overseas?
Well, first of all, I would think that Mr. Lutnick, who is co-chair of the Transition Committee, would have to be very careful about conflicts of interest. I think there was a story written about that today out there about potential conflicts of interest. And the President of the United States, whoever that may or may not be, whether it's Vice President Harris or former President Trump, I think the last thing either one of them would ever want to do is to export the oversight of the largest debt market in the world, which is U.S. Treasury debt. There's $27 trillion of outstanding Treasury debt today. And in that, which is really interesting, the futures market is larger than the cash. We're 13% larger on an average daily volume of notional value for that marketplace. We just had recent legislation come out of the Treasury Department for mandatory clearing of cash treasuries, as you're aware, that gets implemented in 2025 and 2026, respectively, for repo. That jurisdiction goes under the exclusive jurisdiction of the SEC.
Yeah.
So if, in fact, the United States is so concerned about that, how could they not be concerned about a market that's actually larger than the one they're just mandating that be cleared and overseen by the SEC? So to me, there's a lot of issues out there, and it's about the resolution authority. It's not where the money's kept. It's not anybody's being duly regulated in UK and the US.
And I understand that, and I understand that you guys have proven your chops and you'll be able to do this and to do it efficiently and consistently year after year after year. Have you had conversations at all with the SEC, with the Treasury, or anyone in the current administration on this topic?
Right across the board, I have, Romaine. I mean, I'm not shy about it. I've been to the Treasury multiple times. I've talked to Secretary Yellen. I've talked to the undersecretaries. I've talked to the SEC chair, the CFTC chair. I've talked to senior members on the Hill on both sides of the aisle about this and the importance of this product, what it means to the participants, the people of the United States of America, and how we have to make sure that we oversee our own sovereign debt. We'd be the only nation on the planet that does not oversee the laws of our own sovereign debt if we were allowed this to happen.
Terry, did you get a sense from these conversations that there will be, or they're looking to have a resolution on this before the next administration takes office?
I'm not sure if there's going to be a resolution or not, Scarlett. I do believe that there's a lot of interest in this right now. And, you know, I'm not bashful about saying that I've been very vocal about this because I truly believe in it. And one of the things that I've said publicly, Scarlett, is if, in fact, that the London Clearing House, under the ownership of the London Stock Exchange, wants to reopen its U.S. entity and put those products in here under the guidance and oversight of the U.S. government, I don't have a problem with competing with anybody that does that. But that's not the case here. The resolution authority would go to the Bank of England, not to the U.S. Treasury Department, and they're the ones issuing debt. This is so different than anything else we've ever seen in this country.